Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today we are building something from a 1990s classic. Those of you who were around back in the day probably have played a little bit of Half-Life in your time, and I wanted to make something iconic from that game and kind of kick it old school while at the same time making another monster build, because it's been a while since I created a monster. And I thought, what better thing to make than the Headcrab from Half-Life? Yeah, let's get to building. I've had a lot of people ask how I make my templates, so I thought I would include that in this particular build, which means this video is going to be a bit long. Here is the basics. I use a 3D reference model that I get from a program called Sketchfab. Sometimes I get good 3D models of things that I work on, sometimes they don't. And I build up the shape on a mannequin head out of foil. Adding some duct tape here and there to help pull in some areas. It also holds the foil on the head. I bought this dummy head on Amazon for pretty cheap. It's a bit small compared to my ginormous head, but it's definitely a starting point. Once I'm happy with the shape, I cover it with a plastic bag, then begin putting duct tape over it. Be sure to pull the tape as tight as you can to the surface. Because it is symmetrical, I only have to pattern off half of this. Now that I am happy with the coverage of the tape and the shape, I begin drawing lines to cut it off. Usually I go with high and low spots on the build. I try to keep it simple, following the curves of the build and making the fewest pieces possible to make it simple. Once you got the lines, you add registration marks to help you align off parts. And don't forget to label the parts. I usually use anatomical names to help me, and I label the sides. Now I take the duct tape template and I transfer it to poster board so that I can flatten the parts. This may require you to cut some darts in pieces. That's just a slit that the pattern helps to let a curve lay flat. I use my notch punch to cut out reference tabs, then trace, label, guess on angle cuts to highlight, and put material thicknesses I will use. Now we are where the video normally starts. Trace your pattern pieces onto your material. I use 6mm for the body and 48mm to carve the feet and the front hooks out of. Now you gotta heat form the parts a little bit. There are some complex curves on this build, and it'll help you with your seam lines to do this step. It relieves the stress on the seams when you go to glue it up together. Assembly time. I start with the back legs and then the body. I put together one whole side at a time so that the glue doesn't sit for too long. The legs have an outward angle cut where they meet the body. This is so that there's something for it to hold on to when you're joining these little stubby legs. Is it just me, or does the head crab look like a deformed crab and a turkey had a baby? Some parts I can't template until I have other parts assembled, so now I'm going to make the front arms that the claw hooks will sit on. Same steps as before, just used a piece of PVC as the base to build off of. I did heat form the bigger parts here so that they didn't pull apart. Using an acrylic paint pen, I am positioning the arms where I want them to go, and then I'm marking that on both the body and the arms so I know where to put the glue so that I don't waste it. Using my reference image, I freehand the claws. Holding it like this helps me to get it closer to proportion. Not the easiest way to draw something, but it is definitely the most effective way for me. Both the claws and the feet are carved. I thought it would be sturdier and easier this way than templating it out. You cut out the shapes, then you start cutting off angled portions to form it into a point or rounded. I use a Dremel then with a sanding bit to smooth out the cuts and a stone bit to remove the sanding texture. Same thing with the feet. In the reference material, it looks like it had two little toes, so I carved those in while I was at it. I carved out the front protrusions of its mouth, I guess you could say it is, out of some 24mm EVA dowels and then glued them on. I cut a chunk out of the back of the dowels so that they would transition better on the curved front. I also carved some little fangs for the tips of each prong. The bottom gets a little band that goes around the inside. It adds thickness to the opening and allows me to carve details here in a minute for the creature where it attaches to its victims. I also added a piece on the inside of the legs to close up the inside. To add a skin texture to the creature, I heated up a small area and pushed some crumbled foil into it. The foam retains small craters that looks like rough skin. This is also how you would make a leather texture on foam. I then used a wood burner to add wrinkles and fold details all over. I used the Dremel to help add some bigger areas like the opening on the bottom. I also took a blowtorch to the claws to add a little bit of texture to them. I used 2 coats of gray Plasti Dip to seal it, then I blended some shades of brown with the darkest at the bottom and the lightest as it went up to the top. Now time to do some detailing with some acrylic paints. The model I used as a reference had veins running through it, so I put those down first. Then to bring down the contrast of the veins and make them look like they're underneath the surface of the skin, I sponge on some watered down acrylic in lighter colors. I pat off any excess with a paper towel and apply several layers. Lastly, I add red acrylic around the bottom opening, the fangs, and the appendages. And we are finished. Here is the end result. I'm gonna have to put this easily in the top 5 favorite things I've ever made. I think it turned out pretty awesome. The paint job is pretty legit. Definitely a little bit more realistic than 1998 video games were. I definitely think that I captured it pretty well, and at the same time took it a step further and made it a little more realistic. And of course, I had to make it so that you could wear it. It is a snug fit, and you can't see anything out of it. I don't know how that you could improve on that in any way other than maybe right here putting a piece of black cloth and giving yourself a little slit to look out of. Other than that, you're blind. But maybe you'll try and make this head crab yourselves and impress your friends with your video game iconic, amazing, super fun game building skills. I mean, alright. Maybe you'll get some, and inevitably they're gonna ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these, tell them, much props. I don't really want to put it on, but he is kind of hungry, and you're just kind of sitting there, so hold still.